All right, here's the question of the day. You're at a dinner party and someone asks you, what do? You say, I'm a CPA. What happens next? Option A, their eyes light up and they go, oh, wow, tell me everything. Or option B, they nod politely, look over your shoulder for someone more interesting, and suddenly they remember, I think I need another drink. Yeah, it's option B every time. But here's the thing. The dinner party guest who does option B, they have no idea that the CPA in the corner is the person who's going to decide whether their company gets to ring the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Today's guest has literally sat at the table when companies make that leap. He advises management, audit committees, and boards on what it takes to actually go public. And now he's thinking hard about what AI means for the profession that he loves. So we're going to get into all of that today. It's time to get qualified. Welcome to Qualified Opinions, the show for accounting and audit professionals who want more than the textbook answers and webinar jargon. I'm Drew Carrick, also known as the Rapping CPA, and alongside me, as always, is my co-host, Chris Vanover. Chris, before we get into today's episode, do you want to let the audience know if this episode is CPE eligible?
This one is, in fact, CPE eligible on the Earmark app, so definitely check it out and get your CPE while you can on this one.
That's right. Head on over to the Earmark app. We'll leave the link in the description below and get your CPE credit for listening or preferably watching all these beautiful faces. All right. So today's one of those episodes where we get to dig into something that I think's genuinely underrepresented in the profession's conversation. You know, we talk a lot about the pipeline. We talk a lot about AI, but we rarely get someone who's actually doing the work at the intersection of where companies transform. From private to public, from manual to machine, sitting across from us and telling us what it really looks like. Today's guest is a partner at KNAV, a global accounting and advisory firm. He focuses on assurance and accounting advisory, helping private and public companies navigate audit readiness, capital markets transactions, and the kind of complex technical accounting that makes most people's heads spin. I know it makes mine spin. He works directly with management teams, audit committees, and boards to help organizations successfully go public and survive life on the other side of the transition. He's actively involved in the AICPA's Auditing Standards Review Committee and has been recognized as the 40 under 40 list in both the US and India, and he's a Forbes Best in State honoree. He's also someone who thinks seriously about where AI is taking this profession and isn't afraid to say it out loud and say the things that most people are just whispering. So with that, Navneet Sharma, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Drew, and thanks, Chris, for inviting me over. And thank you, Drew, for the lovely introduction.
I feel like we owed like a drum roll at some point for this one. That was exciting stuff you just revealed.
I am a drummer actually in a past life as well. So more than just a rapper, I am a drummer. So I'll make sure that for future episodes, and Navneet, if we ever have you back, we'll have a drum ready to go.
The introduction was good enough for me. Thank you.
All right. So Navneet, before we get into the IPO world and the AI world, give us the quick and dirty version of your path and what you do, because KNAV may not be a name that everybody in the room is going to immediately recognize right off the bat. So I want people to understand the lens that you're coming from.
So maybe, before I give some background about myself, I'll give some background about the firm so that everyone can relate. So KNAV is a multinational mid-size CPA firm who the firm itself is present in 7 countries, US being the headquartered. We are there in Canada, UK, Singapore, Netherlands, UAE, and India. And from a firm's perspective, firm is a full service firm where we do audit, tax, and advisory work for both public and private companies. My background is, as you pointed out, I specialize in US assurance and also advisory, which is IPO readiness. So I audit both private and public companies, at the same time help companies go public. I've been with the firm from past 16 years now. Before that, I worked with KPMG for a few years.
All right. So you've had quite the journey then.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I've kind of seen all. And I've also spent a couple of years in Kenya I was working out of Nairobi. So I've kind of worked in Africa as well.
So you've got that international experience too. Good perspective on the globalization conversation.
Definitely, yeah.
So I know, we can get lost in hours on end talking about AI, which I know is something that you're really passionate about. So I do want to save that portion of it for the second half of the show. And I do want to start with this capital markets and IPO realm. Because when you first told me about, the fact that you're in this space, I don't know much about it necessarily. So I'm excited to hear your insights. I mean, my only perspective is having, worked at a startup company that was planning to eventually IPO, but never actually got to that point where you're participating in that IPO conversation, and especially not from the accounting side of things. So how do you find yourself in that lane? What kind of drew you to it, and what exactly does that entail?
So I believe it all started with me working on, I started with doing private company audits. And as you're working with private companies, you always see that they all aspire to become a public company some point in time. Because they believe that, just like if you're working in finance field, on the industry side, you would eventually want to be the CFO of the company. Similarly, a private company, they always aspire going public at some point in time. And, knowingly or unknowingly, they all work towards it. And when I started working on the private side, and from there, as a firm, we moved into auditing public companies. What always interests me is what goes behind the scene. As an auditor, you come in and it's easy to, have something which is already set up for you to audit, wherein the effort which goes in preparing all of it and then understanding the details of what step goes in to take up a company public. IPO is just an event, but there are so many sequence and smaller events involved to get to that aspect. That is what always interests me. And that's how I kind of, from doing audits, I pivoted towards even helping company to kind of reach there.
So, you've sat across the table from companies who are preparing for IPOs, in that position. What are the most common misconceptions that private companies walk in with when they think about going public that you've sort of picked up in your career?
So what we have seen, in our experience when we are working with private companies who's aspiring to be a public company is there is a misconception that being audit ready means being IPO ready. A lot of time, what happens is, as a private company, if you've got in US, audit is not mandatory, but if you've got debt, you usually get yourself audited. And companies think that because they are getting audited under AICPA standards, they are actually ready to basically go public. But they miss the fact that being audit ready is just a small, it's an important piece, but still it's a piece of the puzzle, and you need to put the whole puzzle together, which kind of involves making sure your internal controls are in order. You got a good financial reporting discipline, because as you go public, you will have to report your quarterly and annual financial statements within a period of time. You need to have good governance structure around it. As a private company, it's okay to not have an audit committee, not having a board, but as a public company, you are answerable to your public shareholders, and you need all that in order. So what they miss is they always think that if they are audit ready, they are IPO ready. And one other aspect which they always miss is they think being private company audit ready also means being PCOB audit ready. And Chris can, he's worked on the PCOB side, so he can talk more about it. But I feel these are two separate things. Being AICPA audit ready and being public company audit ready they are altogether different beasts.
Yeah, it's fascinating, because I think when we look in the media, what we see is somebody at the stock exchange, whether it's NYSE or NASDAQ, ringing the bell. And I don't think any of us, maybe Navneet, you have that appreciation, but a lot of people out there don't have the appreciation of basically all of those steps that have to take place to get to that point. And I'm just curious, what's the shortest IPO length you've seen versus maybe the most longest you've seen at this point? Because I imagine that probably differs from company to company. And your point is not all of them are ready, and it's not just being audit ready, but also all those other steps to get to that bell being rung for their company at some point.
Definitely, Chris. Yeah. So, to answer your question, the shortest I've seen is a company who was always ready in terms of their preparedness. They had their internal controls, their reporting timelines in order. They were able to basically go public in 6 months' time. But the longest I've seen is, and some of them I'm still working with them. The longest I've seen is 2 years, 3 years, and it's not mainly because they are not ready. It's also because the market is not ready. So at times you can be ready with everything, but you need the right window to go public. Otherwise, you'll not get the right valuation. So it's about both the market being ready and at that time you being ready.
I feel like I experienced that where for years on end, we were talking about when is that IPO window going to open up? And I mean, I'm still waiting for that window to apparently open up. I don't know over the last couple of years if you think there's been like, this is a really good time to go public. What's your kind of hot take on that over, just say the last 3 to 5 years? Has there been one of those like, this is the time to do it? Or is it just kind of the big enough companies are just kind of willing it into existence, whether the market's ready or not?
So currently the situation is, it's not about, whether the window is open. It's about which industry you operate in. So maybe for certain industries, the window is there. You've got, if you are an AI company, you are a technology company, you can think about doing it right now. But a lot of other companies, if you are a manufacturing company, you'll have to wait a little longer. But everyone is expecting that the window is going to open up soon. There has been an increase in IPOs over the past 2 years. So that trend is going on. So currently, I see a lot of companies prepping up for an IPO. So everyone wants to not miss this window and they are keeping their things ready. And which can also mean, doing everything with SEC by doing their confidential filing, getting the SEC's approval and being ready so that the moment window opens up, you can just switch from confidential to public filing.
What are the factors that go into saying whether the market is ready at a given point in time?
So usually what happens is, as a process, one is you look at peer companies, you look at recent IPO trends in the industry you operate in and look at the valuation they are getting. At the same time, when as a process, you'll always have bankers involved and your bankers will have a fair idea of what multiples are going on and what will be the best price where you can get listing. A lot of time, what also happens is when you're doing your road shows, that gives you a fair idea whether you are ready and you'll get the right multiples when you actually go public. So roadshows also give you some idea and discussions with banker.
So at what point are you typically in your firm brought in to aid in that process? I mean, there's obviously the when should they, and then there's when do you typically end up getting the call to say, hey, can you help us out with this sort of thing? Are you involved with these companies from very early on, or are they kind of like, oh, shoot, they realize that they might have bit off a little more than they can chew, or that they promised a deadline that's a little quicker than what they actually can deliver on, and they kind of bring you in? Where do you get involved in that process?
So most of the time when we get in, it's not an ideal time to get in. When we get in, it's already too late. And because management, most of the time, they are ambitious. So they think they are ready. And it takes them some time to realize that, we are not ready. I need to bring in somebody. But usually we get in around 6 to 12 months before an IPO event. But what we would prefer and what's ideal is to do it at least 18 months before an IPO event.
So where, from where you sit, like what are the biggest disconnects that show up, when you talk about all the different stakeholders that are involved in the process? Because you'd think, one company, one mission, if a company's successful enough to go public, then they got to have their ducks aligned. But it seems that a lot of the times they're not necessarily aligned between management and the auditors and the board and everything on that IPO journey. Where do you typically see that there's a disconnect?
So the biggest disconnect comes in on timelines. management always believe that we can do an IPO in 3 months' time. We are ready. We do our accounting on a daily basis. We have a trial balance. Some of the cases they say, oh, we've been AICPA audited. So what the auditor need to do is issue a new opinion under PCAOB standard, and maybe it'll take us 30 days and we are good. But what they miss is, there's always a disconnect between the reality from an auditor's lens, from a management's lens, and from board's lens. And you'll always see that all three of them are actually working on 3 different timelines. And a lot of time, our job also involves this simple exercise of getting all of them together and agreeing to a common timeline. And that's where you see a lot of debate and discussion going on, wherein auditor will say, hey, it's going to take us minimum 4 months to uplift, wherein the management will say, hey, we just went through an audit. Why will you need 4 months? And then board will have their own pressure, where board will say, hey, we need to do an IPO event in 3 months' time or 2 months' time. So, timeline becomes the main point of difference between all these stakeholders.
Yeah, and I'm reflecting a little bit on my career in the Big Four in particular, and working through 10K seasons. And, when you speak about the timelines, when I first started in public accounting, it was like there was a 90-day window within which to file a 10K after year end. That eventually got shrunk down to 60 days for these large accelerated filers. And even that was like a stretch. And these were for companies that were already public companies that had their operations down pat. I guess when I hear you say, the 18-month window, management puts these pressures on the deadlines and stuff, it just sounds like really stressful. And I think a lot of our audience is, probably newer in the public accounting landscape at this point. I'm just curious, advice, and what is it really like in the trenches when you're going through that IPO process? And is it as stressful as maybe people make it out to be?
So it is really stressful because everyone is effectively chasing a timeline. And what is critical in the whole process is we've got staleness rules, which basically says if you have your year-end financial statements ready and audited, they will go stale within a period of time. And then you need to have quarter in. By the time you complete quarter, you realize that that's going stale. So you need the next quarter in. So you feel as if your finance team is not ready, you will always be chasing this staleness. And the pressure of that is huge because you are missing onto the window. At the same time, you will have all these consultants helping you, and the bills will keep on going up. And that puts so much pressure on the management and the finance team. But the good thing is that the whole process is rewarding. I mean, I believe the people who actually work on an IPO transaction, they can only understand the value of, as you pointed out, ringing the bell. So the process is rewarding. And one CFO actually, I was in a conference last week and we were talking about going public. And one CFO rightly pointed out, he said, I've done it once in my life. I loved the experience, but I would not do it again.
Yeah, that's interesting because I feel like now.
So for me, it'll be maybe 30 times and maybe more for the firm. But
you got a high tolerance for pain here, I guess. Huh?
You get used to it beyond a point in time.
I feel, because it's interesting. I feel like there's the one and done people, and then there's like the serial IPOers. Like there's the you just kind of you keep coming back because you want to be there in that atmosphere. Like you said, it's rewarding and it brings that excitement. Obviously, that's the lane that you've found some joy in.
Definitely. And that's the reason, why I picked up this question with that other CFO I was talking about is I was asking him why it is so hard for a company who's trying to go public to find a CFO who have done it in the past and can do it for them. And his response was because nobody wants to do it again.
Do you think there's anything in that process, though, that's like over-engineered these days?
I mean, multiple things. One would be the process of comment letters, which you go through back and forth with SEC. That'll be one. But other than that, the issue is that to implement it and to go through that process, it's been done so many times and there's so much data available. You still find that when a company is actually implementing it, they miss the basics. So you've got everything available to you, and there is nothing new to basically unwind. It's just that still you miss the basics. And that's where the focus needs to be on.
So we were talking about the stress that's associated with it. Kind of like a transition of that. You talk about the stress test really being not necessarily the IPO itself, but actually the first year once the company goes public. I mean, so do you stick with these companies that you help with that IPO process, after they do ring the bell, now they're public and now they're subject to all of the requirements that they had to get prepared for? Are you still with them for that part of the journey? And what makes that part of the journey, as far as the real stress test goes, so brutal?
Yeah. So the issue which comes in is and usually what happens is that the companies are so focused on this one event of going public that they don't think beyond. Actually, if you think of it as a public company, your journey only starts the moment you go public. With going public comes in the requirement of your quarterly reportings, your annual reportings. You are always under this watch by your analyst. You have to give your projections, and then you're always chasing that. You have your earnings call. So there's so much new things which come in the moment you go public. And in the process of going public, you are so focused on your annual financial statements, or the next K, or filing your registration statement. You miss the point around this needs to be done repetitively every quarter over quarter. And as you're going public, you can afford to go into staleness. The worst case situation, it'll delay your IPO. But you don't have that liberty when you are already a public company. If you miss a filing deadline, it means, it can get you delisted. It'll have an impact on your stock price, investor confidence. So that, process of going public and then acting as a public company, these are two separate things. And most of the times, when we are involved, we continue with these companies for at least 2 years. Till the time they have their own processes established and their internal team can take over all the responsibilities.
I had a friend who I was recently trying to text for about 3 weeks straight, and he works at a public company in the accounting department. And I was like, why hasn't he texted me back? And it's because it's that quarterly process. And I was like, oh, have you heard about the possible move to every 6 months, instead? And it's interesting that it's on the radar. Do you have any take on that, just because it's recent news?
I would say, that's something which has been discussed a lot. The point is that globally, that's not the case. So one thing which this will lead to is, because, I'm an Indian chartered accountant as well. I come with India background. We've got firms all across. So everywhere else, it's a quarterly requirement. Now, and US capital markets is one market where the whole world is looking at it. So for them to move from a quarterly to a half annually requirement is something which is going to be big. And then they will not be comparable to a lot of the other companies in the world because their results will not be out. So you'll not have quarterlies. But from a company standpoint, definitely it'll reduce the amount of pressure, the requirement of, constantly filing your Qs, that is going to substantially reduce that. I'm not sure whether it's a good thing for consultants, but definitely for the company.
Well, let me ask you, good thing for consultants in what respect?
So, because, one is when you're doing it quarterly as an auditor, your fees is based on quarterly filings. As a consultant, your fees is based on quarterly filings. So now you will do it half annually. So instead of being at the company and servicing them for 4 quarters, you'll only be doing twice in a year. So that's something which
wouldn't you basically just be combining those 2 quarters into one period, and the work is the same, or am I missing
Not
something?
really, because when we are talking about limited reviews, you'll not be reviewing two filings. A lot of time goes into reviewing and prepping up these filings. So now instead of every quarter filing, you'll have 6 monthly filing, which would mean one filing is gone. The comparatives are different. Yes, it's not going to be, it's not going to be that 1 quarter fees is gone, but it's not going to be same as 2 quarter fees.
Got it. So from a fee perspective, it's perhaps a bad thing. From a timing perspective, it would be a bad thing just given the timeliness of information being released. What about, I guess, just from the people experience side of things? Would that be a better way to do it, or would you prefer to keep it as is?
No, I think from a people point of view, it will be a better way of doing it, just because it takes about a month to 45 days to report onto a quarter and about 60 to 90 days to report onto a year end. If you add all of them together, you're talking about 7 months of reporting time. So effectively, everyone is working all throughout. You are always chasing a quarter. And towards the year end, by the time, if you are not a accelerated filer, by the time you file your K, your Q is already due. So you're constantly working. So from people's point of view, I feel it's a great move.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, at least when I was going into public accounting, I didn't quite appreciate the fact that different filers and different companies had different year ends, because you'd always heard, hey, it's a 12/31 year end. Your busy season is traditionally January through March. I started in June at PwC back in the day, and my very first audit was a 6/30 year end that was basically happening in July and August. And then all of a sudden they said, okay, on to your next engagement, which happened to be a 9/30 year end. So then I was busy in October and November. And then all of a sudden December rolls around, of course, my traditional busy season. And then they put you on a 3/31. And then after I had a 3/31, they said, oh, here's a 4/30 year end. And then here's a 5/31 year end, believe it or not. And so it was just kind of this continuous onslaught of filing periods that, associates and seniors and managers, they can hardly catch their breath. So it's one of those where you have to go, the filings are great from a continuous communication standpoint, but also what does it do just for the people within public accounting as well?
There is also the way there, Chris, I think about it from, if you do have, because I came from the not-for-profit audit sector, Navneet, right? And so it was very often, because it was higher education and not-for-profits. A lot of them had 6/30 year ends, and then a lot of them had, like 8/30, the 8/31 year ends, right? So we had the school year end, which was, or the start of the school year type of one, and then the end of the school year type of June 30th. And we ended up, and then there was your traditional ones that just had 12/31 type year ends. And we were able to do in the NFP areas where we were able to sort of balance and spread the work out more evenly. And I think, Chris, that comes down to the leadership of how the work is distributed and assigned. I mean, you're getting reamed if you're constantly put up against a deadline, perpetually. But if we're able to almost allow audit teams to be spread more evenly, there could be a world where some of those different deadlines or year ends maybe could help, as opposed to everything all at once has to be done, and you're going to kill yourself during that period so that you have the rest off. Maybe you're able to spread the work more evenly. And I think this is the other point, Navneet, right, about the biannual filings, and this is where, and I don't know the answer to this. I think, Chris, what you were getting to earlier is, well, is it just that we went from having 25 selections to now we're having, twice a year, 4 times a year, to now 50 selections twice a year? So you still got to do just as much, testing or just as much review. But now you're just condensing it into a period where now all of a sudden everybody's working really intensely twice, as opposed to slightly less intensely 4 times. But I think, Navneet, what you're saying is that it actually is not proportional necessarily to how much, how much work has to get done. Is not necessarily proportional to how many times you have to do it.
That's right. Yeah. And I agree with you, Drew. Like, just to your point, I've seen both the views. In my firm, in our firm, what we have seen is we've got a lot of clients who are December ending, and then we've got almost half of our clients are March ending. So which means, we've got 2 year ends going on, and people find it, Drew, to your point, they think that they can balance it well. A lot of the time, team comes back to me and says, hey, can you give me a mix of both, so that I'm not doing 5 audits who are December ending. I'll rather do 3 which are December audit ending, and then 3 which are March ending. So that just helps them to stagger the work across throughout the year, rather than doing all at once.
I was just going to say, is the IPO world, though, a little bit like an on-demand, where you just have to always be ready for them to call you up and, hey, you got to get in there and get them done and pass the finish line so they can ring the bell? Because I know, again, when we're talking about the 331s versus the 1231s, traditional audit cycles, there's a bit more predictability typically to that. Is it as predictable in the IPO market, or is it literally like, sitting in a firehouse waiting for the alarm to go off and then you go out there and put out the fire?
Yeah, so in the pre-IPO world, it's pretty much like that. It's not predictable, and every company, they've got their own timeline. And when you start, you're talking about, depending on the requirement, 3 years audit or 2 years audit. So that's something which is always on fire. And if you are in an IPO, you're a mix of the team, then it'll be a fire drill always. No matter how better or how good you plan things, it will still be a fire drill.
So I think one of the things that might be helping to put out the fires, this is to make my smooth segue, is AI, right? Because all of this stuff is very reliant on, well, we need people, right? We need people to get sent out there to do all this stuff. And that was where the talent pipeline crisis originated, was, well, we're not going to have enough people in to take care and handle all of this work if people aren't joining the accounting profession, right? Enter, within the last 4 or 5 years, AI into the equation, and suddenly, it's this amazing tool, and then suddenly it's actually an entry-level employee replacement, possibly. So, the environment that you've been describing, public company reporting, real-time data, heightened, scrutiny, is exactly the environment where AI tools are being kind of thrown in at the problem. So I want to talk about, AI in the audit and accounting space, and where it's actually delivering value today. If it is this, something that's just aspirational and with like the vendor marketing, or, you having been in the room with actual engagements, is AI actually doing well in practice in real audits?
It is true. So, globally speaking, all the firms have already started working on AI initiatives. A lot of them have already come out with their agents, and they've been deployed successfully. And it's no longer a nice to have. It is a necessity. And considering the fact which you just mentioned, that there is a talent shortage and it's not improving anytime soon, which means we need to have more automations and AI tools around some of these aspects which nobody likes doing. And what I've seen recently is Big Fours, as we all know, they have already come out with their tools. In their tools, they've integrated AI. But now we need to see, and I've started seeing a shift in mid-sized firms. They have also started looking at AI in terms of how can they bring it into their delivery model to efficiently deliver any audits. And so far, there was this, initially there was this, reluctance wherein everybody was thinking it's going to take away our jobs. And senior partners, you'll see them giving a pushback because they are not that technology savvy people. So that's where that push and pull was going on. But now in 2026, I've seen that trend changing because there are so many use cases which are coming out and people are more receptive towards AI. And in real time, it is really helping. I mean, in real world, it's helping us. As KNAV, we have already developed some excellent and exciting tools, and we are constantly working on it.
Yeah, I'm curious. And I read a lot of the headlines, a lot of the articles out there around the use of AI agents and AI in general being embedded into the audit process. Without necessarily revealing anything proprietary at KNAV, can you just share maybe some specific examples of how an AI agent is being actually deployed within an actual audit these days? Yeah.
So from an auditing standpoint, a couple of tools which we have developed one is around doing any technical analysis. So what used to take us let's say 40 man hours to come out with an accounting memo. Now with our memo writing tool, we can actually do that in 10 hours. What we've also done is, so that's on the preparation side, but on the auditing side, we've also created a module called, which basically can audit a memo. So you take a client's memo, you put it into your tool, it analyzes the conclusion, reads your contract, and basically gives you questions to ask, at the same time prepares, engagement team's memo, and then you can take it and embed it into your work paper. What you have to ensure in this whole process is you need to make sure that you have enough human intervention in the loop, because that is what is required. So that's one tool. The other, the one of the first thing which we did when we were trying to implement and bring in new tools was a lot of time goes into reading contracts. So we have created agents which basically you put in let's say an employment contract or a business combination agreement, and it's going to summarize it for you with all the key terms and conditions and simplify it for you. So you can take that summary and use it for your work paper summarization. So, a staff used to spend a number of hours summarizing these memos. Now you can do it with the help of AI. So that's one more. The third example would be vouching. Vouching, again, is something which nobody likes doing, but it is an important part of audit. It's the most critical substantive procedure. So vouching you can very well automate, and what we have done is we've created a vouching tool wherein you embed your samples, you embed all the support document, and it basically vouch for you.
So times have changed, and quickly they have.
They are, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I've been watching Suits lately, right? And I never saw it when it originally came out, but I've been watching it now to kind of catch up. And it's interesting because I've been viewing it from the context of all of the work that these associates that they have them doing throughout, and really all the work that all of the lawyers are doing, right? Especially when it's dealing with like contract laws and trying to find the exception and trying to research a court case that might be helpful in that situation. They just have all these books and they just have to spend all day, all night reading through. With AI now all of a sudden, and I have a cousin-in-law who's a partner at a law firm, and he's like, I don't even need like these associates. I don't need them to go do it because I can just talk to AI, have it scan through the entire contract. I know what it is that I'm looking for in particular. I can just have AI go scan for it and find it, and then it's done. When it comes to auditing and accounting, I'm kind of curious because, right, if the AI is performing these sorts of procedures, if it's reading through memos, if it's performing this sort of vouching, we automate the repetitive work, the sampling, the ticking, the tying, all that, pattern recognition type stuff. But we're at the same time, and I think this is the catch-22 we're in, we remove some of the inputs that teach professional judgment. So where do you stand on the whole notion of like, is AI making auditors, better at judgment because they're not doing repetitive tasks and they're more focused on that? Or is it kind of eroding how we build this sense of professional judgment where, you look at, a first year staff wouldn't recognize that this is a potential issue, but, a manager, would identify and figure that out because they've seen it enough. With AI doing a lot of this, do we lose some of that professional judgment that's kind of a core to our identity?
So I believe, Drew, the important aspect, which when I was explaining some of these tools I mentioned, was human in the loop. I feel that's the most critical aspect of all of it. AI is to enable you to do better judgments and find more time to basically put your time into judgment related areas and critical areas. It's not to replace that aspect. And it is just an enabler. It's not a replacement tool. And classic example would be risk assessment. When we are doing our risk assessment, we can use AI to identify patterns across the data, which used to take us so much time. You can now do it using AI. But then how to interpret that pattern and do your risk assessment is something which is still is on auditor's judgment. So that aspect is not going away. It only enables you to get the data the way you want to, quicker and faster, so that you can then spend time on doing the real work.
And maybe as a follow-on, though, to Drew's question here, because when I hear you say all this, again, risk assessment, technical memos, and ultimately having a human in the loop, there was an example a couple of weeks ago where a law firm submitted AI-generated information into a brief or a case, and the judge identified it, or the prosecutor, defendant, whoever it was, and ultimately the lawyer ended up paying like an $18,000 fine and can't actually go before the judge anymore, whatever it is, right? Because they weren't the human in the loop in that case. Mm-hmm. The stuff you're talking about, though, I mean, that's typically manager and above level insights that are the human in the loop. So I guess my question is, at that associate and senior associate level, if the things that Drew is referring to that used to be kind of table stakes and ground level tactical stuff that you had to learn on the job, how does an associate or senior where, hey, reading contracts is something they used to have to do and get familiar with, how do they learn to spot those anomalies or hallucinations that might happen through AI to really give you the confidence as a manager or partner that they're identifying what actually matters, without getting the actual experience doing that per se?
So that, Chris, is a shift which we are noticing in our industry currently, and which is there in all the industries because of AI. Previously, there was a traditional approach of learning on the job, wherein you used to give an associate 10 contracts and say, hey, go read these contracts and figure it out, and they basically figure it out for you. Now, there is a shift which is required, which is more from a task execution point of view. You need to move towards conceptual understanding. So a lot of time need to be put into making sure that your associate conceptually understands what they are doing, which means they are no longer required to do vouching on their own, but they need to understand the importance of vouching. What is vouching? What you are trying to tie? What all assertions are linked to this vouching exercise? How do you actually do a vouching? So these things which were supposed to be learned, I mean, you get it on the job. Now we need to make sure that we are adequately training our staff before they start even using any of these AI tools, because they need to understand the concept behind what we are trying to do, which is no longer to be, it's not going to be on the job training. It needs to be conceptual training, which all the firms now need to pivot towards.
Well, and I guess this is just the new age of what formerly was outsourcing and offshoring things, right? Ultimately, you'd have an outsourcing team get in there and do the vouching, the ticking, the tying, and now that outsourcing is basically done by AI. And the senior and the manager ultimately have to elevate in their role to really be able to identify and spot the issues because they conceptually understand the concept.
Yeah, and it can be done. So we've got in our firm, we've got an AI task force, and they keep on debating about how to bring the human in the loop. And one suggestion which came up was the human in the loop, which is the human intervention, can be defined based on the level of associate, which means if the associate is an entry-level associate using a tool to do vouching, we'll make him fill up 3 fields, which he can only fill up by manually looking at the document, versus a 3-year associate. Maybe we'll ask him to fill up 1 field from the actual document to make sure he's actually reading it. So you can get everything done from AI, but you need to have these checks and balances to make sure that human in the loop is there, not just in essence and on paper. He's actually doing what he's supposed to do, being in the loop.
That's pretty fascinating, because this is the first time, Navneet, that I've ever heard of a protocol in order to ensure that there is a human, computer interaction that's actually occurring and it isn't just completely reliant. And I think that's pretty brilliant. And again, it's the first time that I've heard of that. There is a safeguard in place, which is essentially that a human has to actually do some portion of the work to kind of verify that they're not completely outsourcing the entire thing to AI, but they're involved somewhat in that process. And it kind of got me thinking as well, as far as like the training goes, because I do think there is value in the reps. The reference I made the other day actually is you can understand the mechanics of how to hit a baseball, and you can watch all the YouTube videos you want and watch baseball games and take practice swings in your room. But you have to go to the batting cage, and then you have to actually face a real pitcher, and you have to get those reps. And that's why they spend so much time in the minors facing these pitchers before they get called up to the majors. And the only way that you become the batter that you need to be is from getting those reps. And regardless of how much mechanics and regardless of even, a pitching machine, you got to face the real thing. How do we train people, in the future? I mean, is it literally just saying, I know that AI can do this work, but we're going to make you do some of it anyway because you have to get these reps in? Because I don't know what the new trajectory of like an auditor looks like in 5 to 10 years from now, because it used to be a talent shortage, and now it's not necessarily a talent shortage, but it's a talent gap where the haves, the ones with the wisdom and know how to use it on the AI, the ones that understand the concepts that you're talking about, who are in that manager position and are moving on. I go back to my cousin-in-law at the law firm. He's a young partner, so he understands how to use AI more than the older partners. And he also understands, because he's gone through the reps, and so he knows all the concepts and knows how to use AI to look what he's looking for than what the new associates coming in are going to do, who are just relying completely on it. The same thing in audit. You have these new folks coming in, and maybe they're being trained on how to utilize AI. But do we eventually have this multi-year, until I don't know when it ends? Essentially, it just will continue to grow as the experienced folks continue to just take their experience with them as they go up their career ladder, and the new folks coming in are just kind of left with as much knowledge as they started when they came in. How do we train them?
One of the things which we are doing now as we are bringing in these tools is because if on-the-job training is going to be different and it'll be more around how to use AI, we'll have to make sure that before we put them onto a job, we need to have enough trainings around how actually this is done manually. So let's say a vouching, which is now done through AI, you'll have to make your staff do it at least in trainings. And also when you're implementing it for any of your audit clients, because these tools are new, you can always take a subset of your sample and do it manually to recheck the outcome which is coming from AI. So that way the staff will get on-the-job training as well. But we'll have to come out with different ways of making sure that they understand the concept, because otherwise we don't want them to, for them, it should look like they have to click a few buttons, do a process, and whatever outcome comes out of it and rely on that outcome. So the basic understanding is really important now.
What percentage of an audit or even an IPO transaction do you think could be facilitated through AI these days?
So these days, I would say anywhere between 20 to 30%. A lot, because a lot of the tools which are out there, like if you're talking about simple using any LLMs, you can't actually just use any LLM and try and do some of these services, because in a broad LLM, you pick any of them. If it is going out in the web and fetching you answers, then the data set which the LLM is querying can give you wrong answers. It can give you old answer. It can hallucinate more. Now, what all these companies and we are doing is you need to basically define the data set on which it can only query. And then you have to code it in a way that you are basically minimizing the chances of hallucination, which is basically giving it a prompt that if you don't get the answer from this definite data set, you come back and say that the answer is not available, rather than trying to make up an answer. So that is the very reason now, till the time all these tools are developed specifically for our industry, this reliance is still less, but it can be, it's a matter of time. In next few months, maybe by the end of this year, this percentage will even go further up.
I just remember being at a PwC sector conference probably about a dozen years ago or so. And this is obviously well before the advent of AI. And they were talking about a situation where they had comparing a radiologist with a robot at the time, or a computer that was reading through x-rays and trying to determine ultimately whether there was an issue. And the computer basically had 100% accuracy rate of identifying where the issues were. And the human, in spite of all the years of experience they had, maybe was effective 95 to 96, 97% of the time. And what was more fascinating was the fact that what took the radiologist hours to do took the computer a matter of seconds. And so, here we are 12 years later. Is it out of the realm of possibility that a one-person firm could theoretically perform an IPO transaction?
I mean, from where things are today, I think it's still it's going to take a lot of time to make it a reality. From where tools are right now, I don't think that's possible because there's so much of judgment involved that's something which is still with humans. As of now, it's still with humans. So that's not a possibility for now.
Interesting.
I'm wondering, Chris, because that kind of gets me thinking, your radiology example, right, your X-ray example, is there a point where, and I think this is where the focus of the conversation has to move to, is what are these sorts of controls and safeguards that can be put in place? Like, is there a way to make it so that we can utilize AI in an efficient way, and we have a mechanism for addressing a false negative or a false positive? Like, I'm thinking, if this was to make a mistake and say it falsely positively identifies that there's a broken bone, right? The thing that has to be in place is, before you go ahead and put a cast on it, somebody's going to review it and confirm, like, yes, that wasn't just like a piece of hair that was on the screen that made it look like there was a fracture. That was actually, it's actually there, and we're putting a cast on the person. Obviously, you all at the same time deal with the false negatives where you don't want somebody
fracture, Drew.
Hairline fracture, yeah, that must be where it comes from, probably. But yeah, the protocols that can be put in place for how to really safeguard against this, and we are at that point where when it's as good, if not better, than humans. I mean, we're going to deal with this conversation, and Navneet, I'm sure you probably would geek out on this, right? With autonomous vehicles. If they can drive safer than people can, right? Then what right do humans have to be on the road with these cars that are probably never going to get in an accident if we just let them talk to each other? It's usually us that are the reason that we're causing them to have, issues, perhaps, right? And eventually there becomes that argument. I do think, though, there is still value, of course, in knowing how to drive a vehicle. So my hot take, I'll give my qualified opinion, would probably be, and I've said this for a while before AI was even in the picture, you should be required to retake your driver's test every so many years to show that you still know how to do it, right? Especially when you're, at a certain age where maybe your reflexes aren't the same, then you really should make sure that you can still, you're still authorized to drive. It's not something you do one time and forever. The same thing with the training. If I learn how to perform, audit procedures, and I do it in a crash 2-week course, and then all of a sudden I learned how to do it. I know how to do it. Now I'm going to use AI to help me do it. Over the course of 6 months, a year, 2 years, if you haven't actually done it again since then, you've just kind of been leaning on AI, you might have understand the concept then, but you gradually forget it. It's the same reason you have to get recertified as a lifeguard and show that you still remember how to give CPR and how to use a defibrillator, because you're talking about, people's lives that are there.
This is going to scare a lot of people in the room, but when I was at the PCOB in 2013, working, I guess 2011 to 2013, working on the Audit Quality Indicators project, in its infancy, one of the indicators they actually explored was mandating CPA recertification exams every so often, every 5 years or whatever, to prove that you actually were still qualified to be a CPA. Because all we do right now is, check a bunch of boxes saying we obviously did these things for our CPA, and here's the CPE we got to comply with these aspects, and then boom, we're recertified for another couple of years. So that wasn't that far out of the realm of possibilities. It got scrapped, probably to a lot of people's thanks at this point, because I can't imagine having to go there and sit for the CPA exam every 5 years, or even a condensed version of it for that matter. So careful what you speak for, because it could end up haunting everybody here.
That's true. So speaking of that, Navneet, you're involved in the AICPA's Auditing Standards Review Committee, right? So is this conversation about AI and technology and the standards that we need to put around it, is that happening, or is it still like this game of catch up that seems to be perpetually existing throughout the accounting profession, where it'll be 5 or 10 years from now before we actually have that conversation about AI and technology protocols and standards?
No, everybody is talking about it. That's in all the regulators' radar, that they need to come out with standards, which basically helps, and the standard which put guardrails around using AI in auditing. So that's a topic which is under discussion everywhere. In fact, in the recent, maybe September 25 or early this year, even PCAOB came out with their views of coming out with a new method of auditing standards where they'll start following agile method of bringing new changes into auditing standards so that they're not waiting for a long period of time to come out with a change. They'll do it in fragments. So that's absolutely required because you will see a lot of AI being used on the advisory side of it because you're not governed by auditing standards. But on the audit side, you're always worried that if you end up using too much of AI and if eventually a regulator disagree with your process, then you are in a bigger problem. So everybody can drive a lot of more. I mean, they can drive more efficiencies, but they need regulation behind them.
Wow. Okay. I could talk all day about the AI protocols. Chris, I'll leave you with one last comment and question.
Really curious because, everyone thinks there's, I'll call it a lot of sex appeal to the IPO process, right? It's a very sexy thing to be in. You want to ultimately get up there and ring the bell, right? And there's so much that you want, you kind of navigated us through that today in terms of all the behind the scenes that leads up to that. And then we had this, I guess, counterbalancing conversation around what AI is doing to disrupt the audit profession. And so if I'm sitting there in the shoes of maybe a college senior or even a newer associate or senior at a big firm right now, or even a mid-sized firm, I guess the question is like, how would you, Navneet, sell the profession to those folks in this day and age?
I mean, I would simply tell them that, they have all the reasons to be scared, but at the same time, they are at the right place because for somebody who is 50 years old or 60 years old, it is hard to understand AI or any change for that matter. But they are at the stage where they have all the time available to them to learn new things. And the profession is not going away. The only thing is it'll only replace auditors who don't know how to work with AI. But people who know how to work with AI, they will be in demand. And what they need to do is they just need to upskill themselves and make sure they know the basic concepts right. And at the same time, they need to learn how to work with AI. And I believe they'll be best placed. Most likely they'll end up replacing us.
Good words.
I'm not going to leave it on they'll replace us, but I will. Navneet, genuinely, honestly, one of the most fascinating conversations I've had. I mean, from the capital market stuff to the AI thing and just talking about how this is going to impact the future of the profession is one of the more, interesting things that I've had in my hosting career. So I think one of the things we keep coming back to is whether we're talking about a company preparing to go public or a profession trying to figure out what AI means for the people inside it. The answer always is preparation. So being honest with yourself about the gap between where you are and where you need to be and not waiting until the bankers show up or until AI takes your jobs. So we'll leave some links to connect with Navneet and his firm in the description. And if this conversation resonated with you, and I think it will because you're here for exactly this kind of discussion, hit subscribe, leave us a review, and share this with a colleague who's either staring down the IPO process or trying to figure out what AI is actually going to do with their career, or just need CPE credit. Either way, they need to hear this. So if you want to get that CPE credit, head on over to the Earmark app, answer a few test questions, and you'll get it for watching this episode. This has been Qualified Opinions, brought to you by CPAClub, powering accounting firms forward and into the future. I'm Drew Carrick, and until next time, stay qualified.